broken fingers to broken feet to broken ribs. The competitors in the State Rubber Duck Championships suffered them all. The injuries have been attributed to the rough surf, with many boat riders being thrown into the backs of their boat and into the water as the waves pounded down. 200 competitors from 40 clubs converged on Newcastle for the event to be faced by waves averaging 2 metres. Despite this, the organisers say the surf was good for competition because it simulates real rescue conditions. The overall winners were Shelley Beach in first place, with Ballina second and Brunswick and Bronte coming in equal third.
Definitely, the fact that my house
Barbara
is 2 miles
Harford
from
became
the base
involved in the
is,
Greenham Common
well,
issue partly by
a particularly
chance.
horrible kind of
As a
chance,
resident of
but I'm
Newbury,
very,
the American base for cruise missiles was
particularly
practically
with
on her
commentary
doorstep.
that goes- The fact that my house is 2 miles from the base is, well, a particularly horrible kind of chance, but I'm glad in a way that I also was put in that position because it made me recognise the issues at stake.
Ms Harford spends all of her time promoting the women's peace movement, which has spread from its beginnings in Britain throughout the world. At the last demonstration at Greenham Common, 50,000 women turned out in force. Her book, soon to be released, called Women at the Wire, is an account of life on the fence line outside the Greenham Air Base. According to Ms Harford, 62% of Britons are against the sighting of cruise missiles in the United Kingdom. It's this support which has enabled the women to continue their efforts.
It is because of the wider peace movement and because of the members of the public in Britain that we survive. I mean, we live on donations provided by members of the public.
Do you feel that that 18-month vigil achieved anything?
I think it's achieving a great deal. 2.5 years ago, nobody heard of cruise missiles, and very few people were aware of the nuclear issue, aware of the situation that we're now in, aware of the dangers we're now living under. And I think in 2.5 years, we have the rate of awareness has risen considerably.
Barbara Harford speaks tonight at the Newcastle Workers' Club at 7:30.
Which is where
It was full house at the building centre in Broadmeadow for the Olympic fundraising dinner. Some well-known Newcastle sportsmen attended, including several present and past Olympians, swimmer Sonia Gray, long jumper Lynn Garden, Ian Davies, who was in the Australian basketball team, and 505 sailor Terry Kerwood. For guest speaker Norman May, the dinner was one of the final stops in a statewide fundraising tour that has seen him speak at more than 60 functions. May told the audience he was working hard because Australia needed to raise a record $7 million for our biggest ever Olympic team.
I'm sure tonight will be typical of the remarks and the gestures of the Newcastle people, and we should end up with a lot of money when we start the raffle later on. Thank you very much, those of you in Newcastle, for all your efforts in the past and now for the Olympic Fund.
Fundraising activities at the dinner included an auction, which helped the Newcastle Timber Industry Club reach its target of $1,500. In comparison to the large numbers that crowded the Workers' Club recently to see the anti-nuclear campaigners Drs Helen and Bill Caldecott, Barbara Harford raised only slight interest. The stories she had to tell, however, were interesting. Ms Harford left her career as a journalist and freelance writer to campaign full-time for the women's peace movement. She was arrested 3 times during the violent demonstrations at Greenham Common in Britain last year, where the United States was establishing new cruise and Pershing 2 missiles. The long protest against the missiles inspired a massive growth in the women's peace movement and resulted in Ms. Harford writing a book about the Greenham Common called Women at the Wire. She told the audience that the Greenham Common experience had inspired a group of women to sue President Ronald Reagan, US Vice President George Bush and Secretary of State Caspar Weinberger in the United States Federal Court. The court has yet to decide whether these men broke any laws by establishing the nuclear missiles on British soil. Members of the local wool handling industry called a news conference yesterday to point out the effects of the proposed change. They spent the day meeting with counterparts from Western Australia and came away worried that it would result in the death of wool handling in Newcastle, Albany and several other regional centres. If shipping companies stop paying the cost of transferring wool from its point of sale in, for example, Newcastle, to the central point of export, Sydney, the cost would be absorbed by the growers. Their profit margins would be reduced by about $4 a bale, encouraging growers to send their produce directly to Sydney. Selling and containerisation would cease in Newcastle, threatening 350 jobs. The change is part of the Wool Council's attempt to centralise the industry in Sydney. Local wool handlers say centralisation has proved less efficient and more expensive in the past because Sydney's facilities are overloaded. For this reason, says Mr. Tom Towers of the Pastoral House Primac, Newcastle has a future in wool handling.
The efficiencies here, the availability of storage, the very good and strong response from growers to the centre. The receipts have steadily climbed again after the drought, and we would envisage that next year's clip we would be handing something in the order of 275,000 bales, even upwards to 300,000 bales. And the response from the wool buying trade to sales here, our market is a very good one. And we have an efficient dumping and containerisation operation here in Newcastle, and the whole outlook, I believe, for wool is very, very bright.
So working through Newcastle does make good.
Up until last night, the Darks Iceworks site was not one of the approved areas earmarked for development of a Commonwealth Office block. The Policy and Priority Committee, headed by the Deputy Lord Mayor, Alderman Geddes, was approached by the Hornibrook Group for such approval, which the committee gave in principle. But while the committee has indicated that this site is an option, it's not the Council's first preference.
What it means is that we asked the Commonwealth Government to give consideration to this site with a number of other sites in Newcastle.
It's not the Council's favoured site either.
I understand it's not the Council's favoured site, and perhaps it's not the Commonwealth Government's favoured site either. But certainly it's a very good site, and it would have some benefits to Newcastle if it was here.
As an alderman, how do you feel about the site?
Well, as an alderman and personally, I like the site as a Commonwealth office because I think it would commence to get the harbour foreshore plan going, and it would also give people who are using the Commonwealth offices some access to the waterfront area.
As the Tory faithful filed in to hear the Prime Minister, about 100 or so miners shouted good-humoured insults from behind their barricades. They were rigorously policed. In her speech, Mrs. Thatcher warned the miners that strikes destroyed jobs. There were, however, great opportunities for a competitive coal industry, she said.
Mr. President, we are not going to intervene in the coal dispute.
As she left, the miners got a brief glimpse of their target. She told her audience to raise their heads above strikes and wage demands and remember the British were still a great people.
The Soviet media stepped up their propaganda blitz today. The Russian people were told that President Reagan condones terrorism and is responsible for the Soviet walkout. One newspaper charged that anti-Soviet rabble planned to kill Russian athletes. A number of Russian athletes were produced who supported the Soviet action. Olympic team member Lena Bykova said on television she would not like to go to the Olympics and face provocations inspired by Reagan's policies. In Switzerland, Juan Antonio Samaranch, president of the International Olympic Committee, released a letter from President Reagan stating, "I have instructed agencies of the federal government to cooperate fully with Olympic and local officials to ensure the safety of all participants." Athletes around the world continued to train for the Games. The value of the medals they are seeking was lessened with each new addition to the list of boycotting countries.
I suppose it's natural English optimism. We keep clutching on straws and hoping to God that it'll work out.
One such straw was the powerful Russian basketball team, which arrived in France today to take part in qualifying rounds for the Olympics. But while the team was being entertained tonight at a reception in Toulouse, the Soviet news agency ridiculed President Reagan's new assurances. This appeared to dim still further any chances that Moscow will change its mind.
It was a real case of facing the unexpected, and for some, the first taste of strong competition. For the under-10 players, it's often just a game, but as they progress to the under-12s, under-14s and finally the under-16s, the pressure to win becomes more intense. This weekend it was the boys who clashed in one of 4 tournaments held throughout the state, and next weekend the girls will get their chance. 120 boys from all over New South Wales and New Zealand flocked to Wyong for the tournament, which will see only 4 successful players qualify for the state finals to be held in Newcastle later this year. Organiser of the tournament, Mrs. Pat Randall, says because the competition is so tough, the standard has been excellent.
It is a New South Wales Tennis Association point scoring tournament, as well as our own custom credit qualifying. From here, there are qualifiers going out of this tournament into our state finals, which are being held in Newcastle during the August-September holiday period. And the only people that can participate in that state final are people that come out of these qualifying tournaments.
Every animal has a reputation, and so do the riders. That's why when your name is at stake, you have to make sure that you're prepared both mentally and physically, and that your equipment won't let you down. Australian riders are making a name for themselves in the home of bronco bucking, America. Last year, Steve Gibson from Scone took out the World Championship. He believes the standard of riders in Australia are comparable to those in the US.
It's a very good standard in the bronc riding and all the tying events and bull riders and the bareback riders. We've got some really good bronc riders in this country. Glenn Morgan, he's he's a really good bronc rider. He's here today. He's Australian champion. He's also competed overseas probably. I think he's been there about 7 or 8 times, and it's a pretty good standard compared to everywhere else in the world.
According to the organisers, Branxton puts on the best rodeo in the Hunter, with a popular venue, a small ring and hopefully soft ground. But sometimes not even that can help, and your hands get caught in the ropes.
And B. Patterson, out of number 3.
So why do they bother?
Oh, well, you can get injured just about doing anything. It's just a sport. It's no more dangerous than football or any other sport you're going to play. It's just it's just excitement. You want to do it, I suppose, so you just go and do it.
It was a big day for the UNITA leader, Jonas Savimbi, and he was loving every minute of it. The capture of the British hostages had provided his movement with the greatest propaganda coup since UNITA was formed 20 years ago. And it also ensured the presence of the Foreign Office's most senior African advisor. Sir John Leahy had travelled to the bush camp at Jamba on Dr. Savimbi's instructions to ensure the safe release of the prisoners. But after just a few minutes on the rostrum, it was clear that UNITA was milking every drop of publicity from his participation in the ceremony. It's been a day the Foreign Office and its representative Sir John Leahy would like to forget. The handing over of the British hostages has created a dangerous precedent, with the British dealing directly with a rebel guerrilla movement in contravention of the wishes of a legally recognized Angolan government. But in the end, it was the only way to ensure the safe return of the men. But if Sir John thought he was going to walk away with the hostages quickly, he was disappointed. Dr. Savimbi had demanded negotiations with the British government's representatives, talks aimed at encouraging Britain to recognize a UNITA government. The hostages remained oblivious to the political wheeling and dealing, but they were delighted to see us. They'd only been told they were to be set free 24 hours earlier. For a group who'd traveled 800 miles in 36 days, they were in remarkably good shape. The formal handover came near midnight. Everyone, with the exception of Dr. Savimbi, was exhausted. All but 2 of the hostages had gone to bed. At 2 this morning, they were loaded onto a truck heading towards the airstrip. A 10-hour, bone-crushing ride that must have seemed so familiar. This was how UNITA moved them from the north after their capture. The C-130 had been chartered by the British Embassy to fly them out. It was the last leg of a journey that had begun at the diamond mines of northern Angola. It ended at Johannesburg's airport. A decent night's rest, just 1 more flight, and the British hostages will be home on Tuesday.
Representatives from 13 councils in the region attended the meeting at Maitland today, called to pass the constitution for the new association and elect officials. The Hunter Regional Association of Councils emerges from 2 similar organisations which went into recess in the late 70s. Chairman of the association, Councillor Ivor Peebles, believes it will provide a much-needed united front in the Hunter.
The aims of the newly formed Hunter Regional Association is to further the interests and the aims of elected local government throughout the Hunter region, and we are represented by 13 local government councils in the Hunter, and it is our strong desire to work closely with the Federal Department of Local Government, the state government and other recognised Hunter regional bodies.
Do you think that the local government in this particular region hasn't had a strong enough voice in the past?
Well, it most certainly hasn't had a strong enough voice in the past, but right at this very time, the present federal government sees the local government playing a very vital role in the development of the whole of Australia at grassroots level, and this is what our aim is.
Willie Gallagher couldn't be contacted today, but a spokesman for the Rosebuds Club, Pat Clark, says some so-called supporters have shown little patience at recent games by voicing support for the opposition and ridiculing several of the new Rosebuds players. Mr Clark says Coach Gallagher will be expressing his disappointment at this behaviour at tomorrow night's meeting. Gallagher will also attempt to explain to the supporters his and the players' aims and appeal for understanding and patience through a difficult period. Mr Clark says it's vital that Rosebuds continue getting healthy public support to stay in the National League, to provide a team in future for a host of younger local soccer players currently rated among the best in Australia.